Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our UX writing and content design meetup. Lovely to see so many faces, or like so many names, not faces, but I think I recognize a couple of names. Yeah, so basically we are a UX write-up meetup from Zurich and Bern, who went international thanks to COVID. And yeah, we're just three UX writers, or like we all come from some sort of linguistic or UX writing background. And yeah, lovely to see you all here. Right, so today we have a really special talk. We have Charlotte Claussen here. She's going to be talking about error messages. And before you turn off, because error messages sound like a boring topic, I don't think that this will be a boring topic. Actually, I'm 100% sure of it. Charlotte's going to be talking about how to make it work in combination with your team, with your engineers, with speaking with your stakeholders, and how writing an error message is so much more than just, writing a known error. So yeah, we're really happy, really grateful to have you here, Charlotte. And I'll let you introduce yourself a bit more in detail in just a second. Yeah, so Charlotte is based in London. Originally, she speaks Danish as well, so multilingual. She's got vast experience in startups, in corporate environments, as well as agencies. And at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, you're self-employed, right, Charlotte? Yeah, all right. So I feel like she's just the right person to talk to us about this sort of topic, like communication and how to create a message that is helpful for the users. Just very quickly, organizational. If you guys have any questions, if anything technical doesn't work, please use the chat functionality. Lara, Tam, and I will be checking the chat. We'll be writing back in the chat, so just use the chat function. And at the very end of the talk, Charlotte's talk, we'll be having a Q&A session. And so for the Q&A session, just drop all of the questions that you've got in the chat. We'll be gathering them and then picking a couple of them out and asking Charlotte all the questions in the end. So yeah, so in the end, we hope that it'll be a bit more interactive than it is right now. Yeah, I think I've said everything that I wanted to say. And with that, I would love to hand it over to you, Charlotte. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. As everyone knows, this team does really, really good work, and they're doing it on a volunteer basis. So that's always something that is good to support, in my opinion. I also like doing volunteer work myself. I'm involved in Plain, where I've been involved in working on how we can create train-the-trainer information so we can spread awareness and knowledge about the new ISO plain language guidelines that are coming out. And I'm heavily involved in the ISTC, which is the Institute for Scientific and Technical Communication. That means it is an organization for all people who do UX writing, content strategy, technical writing, similar things in the UK mainly. And I'm on the council, and I'm also a mentor. And I've always wanted to help people and help users. While I studied, I was interested in how people know what to do with stuff, and in particular, why they sometimes get it wrong. And I found a way to actually bring that interest into my work. So I really like what I do. And that's also how we got to this. I am very excited about how we work on error scenarios, because I think we often forget how we actually get to the right point, get the right information, approach things the right ways, getting past just thinking about how can we phrase a few words. We actually have to dig a bit deeper than that. So should we just go ahead? It's a huge topic, actually. So we have limited time. What we're going to talk about today is quickly the anatomy of an error message, basically what should be included, a few best practices of how to create and write error messages. We're going to touch on error prevention, and then we're going to talk of that unknown error. But before we do that, I would like for you to maybe write in the chat, what do you think about when you see this picture? Maybe just a word, maybe a sentence. Uh-oh, yeah, I like that one. Stop, ouch.
Urgency warning, gonna hurt.
Pink, yeah, that too. Then you're actually on the right track in regards to the mindset I want you to have, because you could look at this and you just see these are happy colors. We have a plant, we have a balloon that's festive. It's very nice, vibrant. It's a happy picture, right? But I keep looking at that, how close that cactus is to that balloon. And that balloon, if depending on what direction that goes, it can go wrong with that. And that's the mindset you probably have to have when you think about error scenarios. We are so used to, together with our UX colleagues, thinking about how we can make the good, happy path, how we can make things easy and delightful for people. So that's often our main focus. But with this, we actually have to change focus, and we have to be those, basically the grown-up party poopers. We have to worry about what can happen so that our users don't have to, and we have to be professional pessimists. And why is that? That's because, well, error scenarios, we would like not to have them, but they do occur, and users may not always know what to do with them. For example, one friend of mine say, well, error messages, I never know what it is, so I turn off my computer for a few hours. And here we're talking about a person who is actually teaching people who are preparing for university, and she's actually somewhat IT savvy, and that's a solution, to just sit there and waste time. Other people react by getting angry because they're getting blocked and they're in the middle of something and they might be in a hurry. Some people get nervous. They might know what to do, but they'll still be afraid of taking that next step because they don't have enough redundant information. They don't have enough reassurance that nothing's going to explode if they actually do perform that action that they think might be the right one. And then, of course, there are the people who are just sitting there totally clueless. And that won't be their fault. If they are, that'll be our fault. So thinking about the anatomy of an error message, we have to provide problem, cause, and solution. And by that, I mean, we have to clearly state what has happened, because something like this is really not helpful. For some people, this might not be helpful either, but actually for the people this is targeted at, this is very helpful, because this is for administrators who know very well what LDAP means, what a DN is, and being told that the DN is case sensitive is exactly what they need to know to be able to very quickly correct this. And you want to clearly explain why the problem occurred. And why is that? Here you actually are told you can't rename. Well, they don't really know what it is. And you have to specify another name. That's some sort of a suggestion for what you can do, right? But this, a file with the same name already exists, tells you why it didn't work with that other name. And it also tells you what you would do in the future. So it actually teaches you how this thing works, so it won't happen again, because now you have an understanding of how it should work and how you can do in the future. And as we touched on, you want to provide some constructive help. In this case, you're just told that this is not valid. But in this case, you're told, use the format meeting name at example.com. Okay, a video address looks a bit like an email address. And I even know that the thing before the at should be the name of the meeting that I've just created. So to summarize, you want to have a statement of the problem, basically of what happened, the cause, why did it happen, and a solution, which is what can you do to fix it. And of course, you probably wouldn't just say, okay, you would actually like to have buttons that have actions that make sense, descriptive buttons. The error message that doesn't exist, do you think that's the best or the worst one? You can comment in the chat.
I'm seeing worst.
Yeah. And you're all right.
Not needed.
Because it is actually both. Basically, as they say in the Microsoft guidelines, a common belief is that the error messages are the worst experience, worst user experience, and should be avoided at all cost. But it's more accurate to say that user confusion is the worst experience and should be avoided at all cost. Sometimes that cost is a helpful error message. So talking about best practices, do you all see a green line there? Or do I only see that on my screen?
Yeah, we see it as well.
Yeah, I don't know how I got it there. Let me see if I can actually make that disappear. I don't know.
It doesn't matter since it's not blocking anything.
Okay. When you think about error messages, you want to choose the right format. And by that, I mean, you think about different types of error messages. And for that, you obviously have to work together with your designers and with your developers, because you could maybe create a dialogue, which is good for critical information that a user might see or react to, because that basically comes up in front of you. You can't do anything until you've acknowledged that you've seen it. You could do inline or contextual messages that are good for input errors. And those two are the most common, I would say, at least when people think about error messages, those are the first ones that people think of. But you could also think about toasts, which come up for a short period of time, and they're good for feedback on success or failure of a user action. You click the button, you want to see, okay, did the thing actually happen that I want to happen? And for types of error messages, again, you have banners, and those are for errors that affect the whole system, because it might be that it affects something that is not in the view you're currently working on. You will not see that very often in an app that's specialized in just one particular minor thing, but you might very often see that in something, say a complex application you're using at work. And you want to have log entries, and that would be for troubleshooting information for the IT professionals who need to maintain a system or to support it. And the same with email or chat messages. They are for notifying IT professionals who might have to keep an eye on more or less everything in a whole company, and they have to keep an eye on programs that they're not actively using. So that's the only way they'll know that there's an issue, that they are proactively getting told systemically. When thinking about writing it, you have to think about mostly use UX writing best practices. You want to be precise. Don't do this. Tell people in more detail what is necessary. You want to write in a way that users can understand. You don't want to give them some computer gobbledygook, but you want to give them something that is plain language. This again is for administrator users. So for a regular user, this would make no sense. But for the admin who sees this is very clear language, in a language that's very easy for them to understand. The thing about plain language is that everybody thinks that you can't use any jargon at all. That is not correct. What you want to do is you want to write using the terminology that your target users can quickly scan and understand. And if you're specialized in a field, the jargon might actually be easier for you to understand than something explained in generic, normal, plain language. You want to, of course, keep it short, because nobody can relate to a wall of text and people actually will miss details. If you really need something long, you can refer to somewhere else where people can find more information. You don't want to blame users. They already feel uncomfortable there when they're getting the error message. They don't want to get told that something is illegal. They don't want to get told that you didn't enter a name. They want to get told, what can I do to fix it? You don't want to scare people either. Forbidden is scary. Catastrophic failure is scary, and it's unnecessary in most cases. You only want to do that if something really is about to explode, or if somebody's life is at stake because the software is controlling something that's keeping somebody alive. You don't want to be funny or cute. That is, you can be, but you have to be very careful, because something like this, another user with this username already exists. Maybe it's your evil twin. Spooky. I find that very funny, but believe me, not all users do, and especially not if they're panicking. So you have to be careful. And this thing actually mixes up this being cute with actually scaring people. So that's definitely not good. And you want to make sure it gets noticed. And in this case, I'm talking about the placement and the visual design. This seems very visible to us, but that's because I've already scrolled back up where you can see the text. But if you're filling in this very long form and you're at the end of it and can't understand why there's a bit mid button doesn't work, you have to figure out to scroll back up because the information is not in view. This also actually poses an accessibility problem because people might have very narrow vision, or they might need to zoom in a lot, or they might have all sorts of cognitive impairments. So it's a lot to ask from people that they have to read something and then remember that, keeping that in their short-term memory while they scroll down and fix the issue. And that is unnecessary cognitive load. In this case, it's just so much red that you don't know where to look. And in this case, AliExpress was so eager to show me all the coupon options that I could never fix the issue, and I gave up and didn't buy anything. So that's why I've never bought anything from AliExpress. And you don't want to use generic messages. You want one course for one message. And it's quite common that, especially engineers, they have like one standard message. They just slap in every little place in the code where they need an error message. But you don't want that, because you don't want a user to have to troubleshoot for maybe 3 or even more different courses with one message. You want one for each situation, so it's clearer and simpler. You also want to have one user type for one message, because as we've already touched upon above, regular users want different information from what the admin or a developer would want. Also, they might actually need a different type of message, because the user might get a dialog that tells them, oh, you can't sign in. The administrator wants some information that tells them what they have to touch in their backend configuration to fix it. In this case, that's in Dubai. Real estate agent is showing these luxury flats, and then there's a huge error message where there was supposed to be this nice image of the marble floor. And in this case, it would have been better if the error message wasn't there at all. If it would just basically wouldn't show the image and would send a message off to whoever is supporting the system. Here we see a dashboard where an administrator sees. I'm aware that you probably can't read this, but this is a mix of status messages, warnings, and errors. And the first error says the SSL certificate for this CMM has expired. That basically means that the users of this system, they'll get a dialog telling them they can't sign in and that they should contact the administrator, because this is not an issue they can fix. So there's no reason for telling them much more than that. But the administrator needs to know that there's a security certificate that basically works to between system to check that you're actually connected to the right thing, that you're not getting redirected to a system that's trying to steal your data, for example. And all that the admin needs to do is to create a new certificate that has a later expiry date, and then the problem solved. It's actually a very easy fix, but it's very severe consequences if it doesn't fix it right away. And we should need to say this. I got this from David Travis. You don't want to be stupid. And what do I mean by that? This is clearly unhelpful, and so is this. I don't see why that's a problem. And in this case, you want to eliminate the cause of an error, but you're not told what it is. Or you're told that to use that keyboard that is not present. You're told that it's a problem that you are creating an error report. Or you're told that, oh, can't complete the current backup, fine, but the backup cannot complete because it was canceled. Okay, from a system point of view, and you quite often see this, that the engineers will put something in that fits with one component getting a message from another component. So it's been told to do something, and then it's been blocked from doing that. So from a technical point of view, from that component within the software, it is an error, and it triggers an error message. But that one should never have surfaced to anywhere near what the user sees. And one thing I was reminded of last week, because in our own, we have a lunch session series in the ICC, and John Kearney was coming to talk about cybersecurity. One thing I see a lot, and people often work on this in the UX writing challenge, for example, is something like this related to passwords or usernames that are wrong. In this case, we don't want to have the oops. And by the way, we don't want to tell people that that wasn't the right password. And why is that? That's because we have unwanted users, which are hackers. For them, that's very useful information. If they know a username exists in the system, then they're halfway there. So we don't want to tell them that. And the example with signing in is the most well-known example in anything consumers have access to. But if we are talking about things with maybe a development interface, then it gets much more complex, because you really have to weigh out what information do you want to give the user because you want to be helpful, and what information do you have to be careful with giving away because it might actually fall into the wrong hands. And that's why you often see something like this. Your password is incorrect, or this account doesn't exist. You're not told which one. And for many people that will feel unhelpful, but there is a reason for it. And you're actually given a way out. There are actually 2 different actions you can do. So you're not just stuck there. Let's talk about error prevention. Just quickly touch upon that. There are a few things you can do to avoid errors in the first place. For example, you can show previews before users commit to something. You just see what's going to happen, and you can accept yes or no. Was this actually what I wanted? You can use confirmation dialogues, especially if you're doing something that has some relatively severe consequences. In this case, you're actually throwing out lots of users. You are temporarily losing lots of data that you need right there in the moment, and that's not coming back. So that means that you probably don't want to restart meeting management while there are really important meetings going on. And you want to use descriptive microcopy in forms. Something like this is very helpful and will prevent you from having to go through a lot of trial and error. You want to validate user input, basically telling people, was this correct or not? Was this useful or not? If not, you tell them what to do right away, instead of having them wait until they maybe have filled in 20 things and then get told this off. And you can add some guardrails, some helpful constraints. In this case, it won't let you book something in the past. Let's pretend that this says 22 or something instead. And it also grays out dates that you can't book. And you want to support undo functions when possible. Gmail is good at that. You may want to autocorrect misspellings and wrong formats. And we all know Google is very good at that. And you want to fix issues in the background. And this is one of the things where you really want to work closely with UXers and developers. Because with something like this, is it really necessary that everybody will be signed out? Yes, it is. Because if you're restarting the whole system, there's nothing else you can do. Then you'll have to build resiliency, and that's a much bigger thing to do. And it is possible, but it requires not more than just that. But you could maybe do something about that information that may or may not be lost. But still, it requires development work, and it has to be a priority. So, what about the unknown error? It's very popular. If I do a Google search, I always get around 1 million results. And most of those turn out to be links to forums where people are asking for help on what to do with this specific unknown error. And funny enough, there's usually always somebody who has an answer. So either they're really unknown or what. And I'd like to ask you, what would you do to edit this? Does anyone have suggestions?
Talk to the team. Go out and find the people who know what I'm reading. Describe the error and what the user can do next. Yeah, at least add a suggestion on what to do next.
Yeah, and how do you go about that? Well, it's time for some investigation. And of course, what you do first is you ask. And you ask the developers, but also support people and testers. And why do I mention support people and testers? That's because they are secondary to the developers. So they're just like our proofreaders. They see things that the developers don't. They also have a different mindset because they're actually looking actively for the problems. So they are more likely to know stuff that the developers may or may not have thought of. You also want to test the software if possible. And that's again where I often go to testers or support people for help, because they have skills I don't. They often have equipment and software that I don't have access to. So we can actually work together because I have maybe the UX knowledge, while they have the technical knowledge and they have the know-how and the equipment to set up relevant tests. And together we can figure out, okay, how does this actually work and where does it occur? And then there's one place where I think more and more UX writers are aware of this, but many people don't think of it. It's a good idea to look at the text strings in the code. And what do I mean by text string? Experienced people know this, but some people may not know this. All the text in the user interface is split up into small bits and pieces that are called text strings. And each text string is typically connected to the generic code via a token or ID. Whether you call it one or the other, it's the same principle. So something like this, you have an unknown error. You may go and look at the text strings and you see this ID says translation dictionary participant update failed. That may not make much sense, but if you have an idea of what features are in the software and you know what the naming structure is for all these IDs, then it's suddenly information you can use. This is a made-up example, and it's very similar to something I worked on in Cisco that I'm not allowed to share. But what you can see from this is that something about a translation dictionary, there's something about a participant, and there's an update that has failed. So that means that I went to the developer first and say, hey, this unknown error, what do we know about this? And the developer says, we don't know anything. Yeah, but what caused it? Oh, we don't know, we have no clue. But do we have any information that we could give our users? And they will say, no, there's nothing we can say. Now I can go back to the developer and say, yeah, but I saw this in the strings. It seems to be related to this translation dictionary. And then I get told, yeah. The system failed to update the participant translation dictionary. Yeah, what does that mean? What happened right before it? Or what didn't happen? Well, the dictionary could not be added/edited/removed for an unknown reason. Okay, the reason is unknown, but it's something related to wanting to make changes to the dictionary and 3 different kinds of changes. So what are you thinking now? This could maybe be turned into this, and we get something like this. So suddenly we have something that's much more related to what the user was actually just trying to do. And that means that now they have some reassurance. So even though they don't know why it happened or exactly what happened, they know that, hey, I tried to do this thing and it didn't work. And this is not related to anything else in the application. So I'm not completely blocked. And if you know this application, you will know that this feature is an extra thing that's nice to have. So you can actually just leave it, ignore it for a bit and work on something else, because this is not the main thing that you do with the software. So all is good. So that means already there you've given information that's useful, although you haven't told them exactly what happened. And then you can think about what you can do next, because I could ask the engineer, well, what can they do? Well, this is a web application, and typically what's happened is because there's some sort of connection issue that's temporary. So I would say refresh the page and try again. And ask him, well, how likely is that to happen? Very likely. Okay, but what does that mean? Maybe in percent? Yeah, I would say 90%. It's most likely to happen, maybe even more. I think most likely this is actually what will happen, especially if you do this like once or twice, then definitely will work. And ask, but what about if you've uploaded a file and it's corrupted, and now there's a corrupted file in the software because it wasn't updated properly? Not a problem, because that'll just be overwritten by the new one. So that means that it's basically risk-free to try again. And it's very likely to work. So now we suddenly have something that we can provide as information that's useful. And we've gotten quite far from unknown error to something that can keep people calm and can give them a solution that for the most part would work. That said, once in a while, there are cases where nobody knows what's going on and why it happened. And you need to have these fallback messages that are in the system in case all is fails. And that could be maybe 1 or 3. That shouldn't be 10 or hundreds. That should be 1 to 3, I would say, in one system. And you have to think about what can you say, because you don't want to just say unknown error. You would like to give people something that they could do, because even when you have no clue what's going on, typically any IT support person would have some sort of suggestion of what they would do. So at least if it's a mobile app, you can at least try to restart the app. And then if that doesn't work, you can contact support. And just a small word of caution with support, you have to be aware of, is there a support? Don't refer to support if they're not there. Is support overworked? Don't refer to support if it's unnecessary. And who is support? If you are creating business-to-business software, it may be that this would be your local administrator in the company that bought the software. If this is software as a service, it's most likely your own support in your own company. And you may also even have different support functions depending on what user type this is, or what. Sorry? Someone was saying something, I didn't hear it.
I have a feeling someone accidentally unmuted.
Not a problem. Okay. But it's fine if you have questions. So basically you want to think about what solution you refer to. If you don't have a support, refer to your knowledge base or help system. If you do have a support, instead of just saying contact support, if you do have contact information, provide links to that chat or a phone number directly there. Don't make people look for information that you can give them right there and then. It might also be that, in some cases, you don't really know what to do. You don't have a support, but at least you can refer to your online help. It may not help, but at least you provided something. And there's one solution, Restart Fabrica. This is from a Microsoft example from their own guides. And this is a bit more of a modern example from Slack. But common for both is that they're suggesting some of the common solutions that you would typically try if you're an IT supporter that may or may not help. But you're also providing a way out in terms of referring to the help center and to support. So going back to how you get information, you ask, you test, you look at the strings in the code because they're usually a forgotten source of information. Of course, you would also look in Jira, you would look in your internal wikis or in any information that developers, testers, and colleagues have to find information. But I mentioned the text string specifically because it's one place that many people forget to look. And it's very good for asking follow-up questions to developers who have no answers to begin with. And it's not because they literally don't want to tell you. You just have to ask the right way to kind of connect to the right place in their brain. So basically, again, you say maybe something like, what happens right before the error occurs? So instead of asking what triggers the error, just asking like that instead might give you an answer that you didn't get before. And does the problem affect more than one thing? And is there a risk of breaking anything or losing data? That's important, especially for how you phrase any information you give in the error message. You basically want sirens and flashing lights in someone's bedroom if there's risk of life. But if it's just, you will just have to try again maybe, and nothing is lost, it's just like temporary loss of connection, then you definitely don't want people to panic. And believe me, if you don't give them information, they have too much space to actually use their imagination, and they will. And you want to ask them what a user can try and how likely is that to work in %. And again, when I say in percent, it's because quite often they say, oh, that's quite likely. And it's unclear how much that is. But if they say, I would say like 60%, then you would say, okay, it doesn't happen for everyone, but it's at least more likely than not. So I'll consider putting it in the error message as a solution. So you have some ideas. So basically, stop thinking about causation, think about correlation, and use that mindset to ask questions and to work together with the engineers, because they're not purposely keeping information away from you. Most of them aren't anyway. So key takeaways from this are, there are lots of rules, and you will find lots of articles that tell you specifically how to write good error messages. But I say, don't focus on the rules, because there's something more important at play. Think about this. Find ways to predict and prevent problems, and give users the information they need to move on, and keep them calm. Because again, thinking like that, you want to be the one thinking about what can happen, so they don't have to, because you don't want them to waste their time. You don't want them to be angry or nervous or to be completely lost. You want them to be happy and focused on the task at hand, what they want to do or what they need to do. And I would like to hear your thoughts on this, and hopefully we can get some good discussions going. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I think I speak for everyone when I say I loved all your tips of like communicating with teams from other parts of the company, and I really loved, the very real examples that you brought. I really felt that you have a lot of experience in this, so thank you so much for all your insights. Yeah, and I think what you just said, let's open up the discussion. I feel I'm seeing a couple of questions already in the chat. I will try and gather them, and I'll throw them at you, Charlotte. And then if anyone wants to chime in, feel free to do so, but you do not have to. All right, so the first thing that I see is Stay saying that the 5 whys technique has also proved very helpful in a few occasions when working with developers and error messages. So that was just also a comment on how to talk to different teams that maybe have a different lingo and different jargon. And then here's a question from Amelia. What if the developers don't want to share like that information of why an error has gone wrong? Apparently Amelia has hit this wall at her current job. Would you have any suggestions there?
You would want to try to build relationships. And what I've done is that sometimes I just get my information from other sources. Like I always have a very close relationship with testers and support. In particular, support have a vested interest in us doing good work because it affects them directly. So they're often very, very keen to collaborate. Also, one thing that actually worked in a previous company I worked on was that I did a talk similar to that, but only with examples from within the company. And I did it at an intern developer targeted conference. So I phrased it like, this is how developers can work on error messages. So I didn't say, hey, you should come to me and you should give me information. That was not what it was. I didn't talk about, this is why content design or UX writing is good and this is why you need us. I just talked about basically, what are the principles behind it and what is useful when you think about error scenarios. And that actually resulted in engineers not just slapping in things, and they started coming to me or to my colleagues, either other writers or UX designers, to get help with error messages instead of just slapping something in there. So I find that the direct approach, I've tried it many times and it never works. And I've really made many mistakes in that account. There are some engineers who, for some reason, think that we shouldn't be there. And for some reason think that they have a hard time to see our field as something that you're a specialist in, because they feel that everybody can write and they know best. So why should we even be involved and why should we even get this information? And if engineers think that our job is basically just to type the things they don't have time for, then it's also difficult for them to understand why they should share any information with you. I actually have given a separate talk about that at tech writer conferences, because many tech writers are quite introvert and don't know how to deal with this. And the general thing is that people think, okay, if I just like ignore it and I just focus on my work and do well, then I'll see. But that's actually not true, because you can't do good work if people don't understand what your work is and how you do it. Because if they think your job is to type, they can't understand why you need access to early versions of the software. They can't understand why you need to get involved with UX when they're discussing key terminology at the early stages, or why you need to be involved in user research or testing. They won't understand that if they have the wrong ideas of what you're doing. So the idea of just going head down, focus on yours and ignore what others think is not helpful. But yeah, don't try to teach people, but try to build relations, and also try to talk to engineers about other stuff, or just ask them about their work. So you don't only come to them exactly at the moment when you need information and they're getting annoyed. And was that helpful at all? I know it's not very precise, but I think the problem with these things is that as soon as you deal with people, you have to figure out who they are and what works.
And so Amelia said in the chat, yes, thank you so much. And I think that's great. Even just like like as a UX writer, try and go and talk to people, even when you don't have a specific question, build relations. And then, do not just communicating with the words in writing, but also with words and speaking. Yeah, I really like that tip.
Yeah, to add to that, you can also say you can notice what they want to do, because you would always think that everybody just wants to create a good product, but that's actually not always true, because their own agenda might be something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They still want to create a good product, but it might be that one person's main thing right now is a side project that he actually wants some manager to approve, and then that's his focus. And you want to notice who people listen to.
Understand other people's priorities, which is something that us as UX writers are good at anyhow, right? Because we're trying to understand our users. So maybe I've got two questions here that are more out of like the writing corner of writing error messages, sorry. So Shivi has asked, what's your take on using please in error messages? Does being polite help lighten the situation for the users at all? And then maybe in contrast to that, who was it? Where was it? Here we go. Samara has asked, do you ever provide error codes in messaging? So kind of the opposite of being polite, but being more technical and saying, hey, this is the 404 error message. But do you have a take on that, or a general guideline?
Yes, about the politeness. You always have to weigh out this thing of being human and making things easy to scan, because it is software, it's not a person talking to you. So you don't want all this bluff and fluff when it's not a verbal conversation. Also, if you say please and sorry all the time, it doesn't seem genuine. However, you do want to say please if you are asking people to do something they really shouldn't have to because the system failed. And you do want to say sorry if you're seriously inconveniencing people because there's a problem. That's none of their fault. But don't do it all the time. So regarding error codes, yes, it does make sense for some technical users, because there are some codes that are generally known. For example, when you talk APIs and when you talk HTML, there are some codes that are generally known in the business, so it makes sense. It also makes sense if you have legacy software where people might actually have worked with the same software for over 10 years and they're used to some codes, then you don't want to suddenly remove them. Because like I said about jargon and plain language, sometimes the error codes is their jargon and is the first thing they would think of. So if you're taking that away and that's actually what made sense to them because they've learned these over 10 or more years, then you might actually cause a problem. But I wouldn't introduce error codes in new stuff. For that, I will be more focused on using the right vocabulary.
So it kind of has to do with like the trying to be in the shoes or thinking out of the perspective of what your users understand or what they know, where they're coming from. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for that answer. So I have one question here from Stay. Hope I'm saying that correctly. First of all, he said, great presentation. Thank you so much. And apparently you said that sometimes preventing the error is difficult because it's more expensive, but it has to be a priority. So how would you recommend positioning when your stakeholders don't consider it as a priority, or when they come to you when it's too late and you only get the chance to write the message? So how do you recommend going about with positioning like the importance of writing error messages in a company?
That's a tough one. Because in general people have this idea that you just slap something in there at the end and you don't need to get involved, and then we end up with something like this because nobody thought about the consequences of not trying to fix the issue up front, and nobody thought about the consequences of maybe having the wrong labels in the green path, the happy path, or like the generic workflow, because that could actually maybe prevent some user errors. Of course, system errors is a different thing that can't just be prevented by usability. If it's just too late, then it's just too late, and all you can do is to make the best explanation you can and maybe refer to a help system, because at least some information is there. So, but it's like adding a band-aid to something where nobody should have gotten hurt in the first place. And you just have to make do with what you can. But that's again where you have to try to work internally in the organization. And again, I'll get back to the focus on what's important to them. Focus on what things are they, what are their goals, what are they thinking of, what's on their minds, and think about how you can be helpful with that. In, hey, actually, you wanted to have more people book seats for their flights, but actually there is this problem where people often get error messages and then they give up and they don't want to pay. So you're actually losing out on money here, but you actually had a goal of getting more people to buy additional services to your flight ticket. Here's a solution, but you have to always align it with what other people need to do. What are their goals, and see what you can come up with that aligns with that. And it's not something you can do from one day to another. You have to basically build relationships that way, and slowly make people aware that you actually have expertise that can help them reach their goals.
So here's another question that goes into like a similar, into the communication kind of corner of things. So what would you do if like engineers can't accommodate for separate error messages for each and every case that, might happen, and you have to use a generic message for several causes? Like, do you have any tips on that or any experience?
Well, in most cases they can. Because if they can tell you about 3 different causes, it's most likely that there's something in the code that can be used to define what that is. It isn't always true. There are actually some cases, like for example, when I was in Cisco, we had lots of dependencies from different equipment. So there were actually cases where we did not know what caused an error, and where we could not know from the software perspective without having to make changes to third-party software or to some legacy software. So it would be a huge operation that involved other people than just our team. And then we would have to make do and basically do this list of troubleshooting steps. Mm-hmm. But we didn't write that this might be 3 different causes. We basically put options for these are the things you can do, because it might be so and so and so, and also with a fallback of contacting your admin or contacting support. And it's not ideal. But I would say in most cases, there are things they can do, but it's just a matter of whether it's a priority to do anything about it, because engineering resources are sparse, just like ours are.
Good to know. Should be possible.
Not always, but most cases it is.
In most cases. So I think maybe we have time for one or two more questions. So here's one more from the design side. How would you suggest dealing with writing error messages in design prototypes? Do they matter at that stage or are not yet?
I would say you should work on error scenarios whenever you can and as early as possible, because if you think about it while you're at it, it might be that you also can eliminate it already there and then. Because if that's part of your process when you go on and you iterate and your whole team working on it and thinking about it, then it's very likely that at that stage you can also come up with solutions. And by the way, you shouldn't just work only with the designers. You should also have some developers involved in those early stages, so you can discuss what's possible, what might happen, because UXers and us, we would know what works for the users, what mental models do they have, but the developers would know what actually works below the surface and what are the things that might be triggered if we are trying to do this. And we might actually be trying to do something that's slightly on the edge of what the platform can do. And a developer on board or several developers on board in the early stages can help with that.
So communication and collaboration always wins.
Exactly.
I feel like this is a recurring topic.
People often ask me what it takes to be a good tech writer, which comprises UX writing and other aspects. And I always say that it's a good team, because you're only as good as your team.
I love that. I think that's a really nice note to end. I mean, unless we have any other burning questions, even if someone wants to jump in and take the mic, feel free here. But if not, then Charlotte, I think that was a really great end to the talk. You know, you're only as good as a writer as your team is. Thank you so much for all of your insights. I think, yeah, we're hearing in the chat, we're hearing applause. We're hearing thanks so much for all the practical tips. We have developers that also said it's been a very insightful session. So just all in all, thank you, Charlotte. It's really been a great session with you today. And thank you to everyone who was here. I think, yeah, I mean, just the discussion at the end is always one of the most valuable parts. So thanks for being a part of it. And with that, I think the official part of our meetup, we can call it a wrap. We can wrap it up. If anybody would like to stay, we do have this tradition of staying at the end of our meetup and hosting a online speed networking event where we send those of you who stay off into breakout rooms so you can actually get to know each other. In case you would like to stay, feel free to stay for a little bit longer. And if not, wishing you a lovely Wednesday morning, evening, day, wherever you're at. And thank you for joining in with us. And thanks again to Charlotte. It's really, yeah, been a great session today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks all for some really good questions and comments.